So, meeting Utah state standards, the following slides will contain the state standards for effective teachers in the state of Utah, which is where I am going to get my level 4 license. And this comes from the Utah Educators Network, the following web address, and this was the date that I last accessed this website. So, the standard number one is learner development. And so the way that I understood the kind of the areas of student development was I gave the students opportunities to show their strengths and their interests. And one of my favorite things was to allow a student to come up to the board and do bell work. Now, this was voluntary, so they had the chance to do it. I would give them the opportunity to choose one that they already knew so that they wouldn't ever get called on one that they didn't know. And there were days where I would pick something that I knew a student would have a success with. So something simple when it came to solving for an equation or doing some of the review that we were doing for our thing for our unit. I loved to collaborate with families. We live in a very, very small community. So at the high school here, our local high school, we have grades 7 through 12, including all staff, students, everything combined. We have 300 people. So it's very small. So the opportunities we have to collaborate is regular. I mean, at the grocery store, at the post office, because we don't have mailboxes. It's that rural. But I did enjoy seeing the student growth, and one of the other things that we did was we met as a PLC group. So the math teachers, there's 3 separate math teachers for grades 7 through 12 at the high school, and we were able to meet. And although we didn't all teach the same students with the same method, like I mentioned in part 1 of my video, we have the opportunity to have some of our students on an online math program. We were able to pull up the results from the students and compare the data that we had, and I found that that was very useful to identify, and it even became more useful when we started targeting students and putting their names down on a spreadsheet for if they were proficient or above proficient, or if indeed they were still below proficient or approaching proficiency. So another one of the standards is learning differences, and we didn't have a lot of linguistic diversity in the classroom. The learners that I taught, English was all their first language, but cultural diversity we do have a lot of, because this is an oil field community where we do have some kids that come from just drastically different backgrounds than the students that have lived here for generations, because their parents and grandparents and great grandparents all owned land and raised cows. So it was fun to see and intermingle the mix of kids that I had. We one day put on, we call it the Chinese flute music. It was kind of the Braveheart music. It was just quiet music in the background so that they had an opportunity to work together, and that was kind of fun. The thing that I really tried to preserve was the language of math and its purity. So we used the correct language throughout. Are we dealing with this expression? Is this an equation? Where do the points intersect? Is this solution infinite? Does it indeed have an ordered pair as the solution? Things like that. Another thing that we worked on was the learning environment. So how could I support individual and collaborative learning and positive social interaction? And so the individual learning, I did a lot of direct instruction. I felt like I needed to teach and demonstrate and show with example to the students. Also, they were able to do their own work on their whiteboard. Now, I did occasionally see all of the kids turn and look at maybe the smart, quote unquote, kids' whiteboard before holding theirs up, but it didn't take me long before I would recognize and say, all right, just this half of the room, hold up your whiteboards first, or this have to, this one, this have to, this one, and we kind of had a way to do it. Collaborative learning took place when they were able to work together. So on the group worksheet, or on the CUDA software worksheets that they were doing, they had the opportunity to work together with partners, and that helped those that were learning and grasping it quickly were able to take a minute and pause and see if they could explain it to one of the struggling students. Also, positive social interaction. We had so much fun with one of the activities was drawing a picture reviewing slopes of lines, Slope Man, and being able to show it to the class. So some of the content knowledge was hugely important for me, and it was engaging the students in inquiry. And like I said in part one, there really was a moment of just almost chills in the classroom when I, as a teacher, walked through and showed the students and demonstrated that regardless of the method we were going to use to solve this system of linear equations, it had one solution. So we could manipulate the equation and graph it. We could manipulate the equation and use elimination. We could manipulate the equations and use substitution. And every time we walked through it, we got to the same point. And then it was just really an opportunity for them to visualize this math and be able to see it at an abstract level. My biggest success was afterwards, I gave the students the opportunity to do the system of linear inequalities and quickly reviewed the prior knowledge that they had about inequalities and made a comment on how to shade. And it was just so impressive that so many of the students were able to apply the system of linear equations to these linear inequalities, and without being instructed had this presence and this idea of how to do it. And so the assessments, like I said, Hattie's tool for feedback was kind of my driving force and what I was doing. So pre-assessments were very informal. The formative assessments took place with just the CUDA software worksheets, and as well as the Mastery Connect based standard-based tests. Summative and test assessment will take place at the end of the year, and hopefully on their SAGE exams they will do well. Like I said, this was previously taught, and the previously taught students were successful on this summative assessment. I think it was the direct feedback, the data, the Mastery Connect instant data that I was able to see as far as who was understanding it, who needed to be retaught, and who needed another opportunity to learn. The descriptive feedback was verbal, oftentimes from the whiteboards that we did. Planning. Like I said, I used the same standard routine of bell work, instruction, whiteboard, worksheet, and then occasionally threw in the activity and the group work that allowed the students to just have maybe kind of a sense of stability with the routine, and it was fun to see that they were able to come in and as we had this environment, this close-knit environment, I had been their teacher the year before, they had picked to be in my class. It was very open to discussion and to viewing the new ideas. So instructional strategies were, like I said, the routine. The misconceptions that the students had basically fell back to algebraic mistakes in manipulating the equations, and I do wish I would have practiced that a little more. Although they seemed familiar with graphing, they did not seem familiar with rearranging, and distributing a negative was something that reoccurred as a mistake. So the next few standards, there's 3 more standards for Utah, and these are professional responsibilities. So The reflection and continuous growth, this took place during our PLCs, which was a Monday morning meeting that was required by our administrator. And we were to bring the data to that meeting and collaborate as to what we could do to reteach or have our intervention team step in and maybe provide additional support for the students that were struggling. The leadership and collaboration was important for me because it allowed me to feel like I had something to contribute to the overall learning of the students. And I really had to advocate for some of these kids that maybe didn't understand math at this basic learning level. So, in the seventh grade, maybe they struggled with something fundamental. But now, as we brought in the use of technology and they were able to use their calculators to even subtract the fractions or multiply the fraction through to rearrange this equation. With the use of calculators, it really gave them a sense of security and empowered them in math, and I enjoyed that. Professional and ethical behavior, and this is where I wanted to focus on some of the things that I was able to do to make sure that it was fair for the students. One, during this process, I'm getting my master's, I was able to take additional classes as a new teacher in the school district. I was able to do some of those things to ensure that my license was current and fair and up to date for the students. And as I was able to take these classes, I was able to open my eyes to these new practices. It's been 20 years since I had done my undergraduate, and so found a lot of things that would help my students and tried really hard to make sure that as I did these things, it was great for my school as well as for my students. Again, this is part 2 of my professional portfolio.